All right. Good morning, team. Thanks for joining us this morning. We are at 12 o'clock now. I might just give another a few seconds while we just wait for any last stragglers to join. It's a little bit cold and rainy in Brisbane, Vegas here. Hopefully, wherever you're joining, it's a bit more sunnier than here. Luke and I are in Brisbane, so a little bit rainy.
Good weather for ducks.
Good weather for ducks. You're right.
Yeah.
It is good weather for ducks. Indeed. Indeed. Just give it a couple more seconds. All right, I might crack on. So let me just share my screen for a moment. Luke, can you see that okay, that screen?
Certainly can, yes.
All the goofballs here. Good morning, team. This is a bit of a hot topic for us this morning. Good morning. My name is Matt Hayward from an IT support company, Blackguard. And with me, I've got the very, very handsome Luke Anderson joining us this morning. We're an IT support company. Luke, tell us a bit about yourself. Where are you from? Who are you? What do you do?
Yeah, look, I'm from an insurance advisor at Ashgrove in Brisbane. I suppose what we do is we provide quality general insurance advice to clients that entrust us to do that. And that's for the whole gambit of the general insurance industry that we look at, no matter what size business you are. And certainly, look, the other cornerstone of our business is helping our clients with claims as well in time of need.
Look, this was really funny because when we originally discussed this idea on a joint webinar we're co-hosting together, it's so funny because even though we dance in the space together in you do insurance in the cyberspace and I do IT, I handle the technical side. When we got talking about it, and this was my fault, there were so many areas and pitfalls to talk about that overlap that I just realized, you know what, this topic is is a little bit bigger than Ben-Hur, and there were so many gray areas, not just from the IT side of things, but in the vein of the topic, which is cyber insurance. What does it cover? What doesn't it? And what are some of the pitfalls as a business owner that I need to worry about? I got to say, it went really down a rabbit hole. And in hindsight, I really should have mapped it out. I guess you and I, me actually, mapped that further, which is a great topic because it's so important. And I feel like it's a real hot topic amongst businesses out there, if that sounds like a fair statement.
Yeah, so look, cyber insurance is definitely on every business's mind. If you look at some of the consumer sentiment surveys done, generally about business, I think the number one thing that most people have been worried about at the moment is those imminent threats, and what that looks like, because it is so unpredictable, from a cyber-related event.
It's so funny because we've got an hour obviously on this webinar, and 45 minutes. We've got 15 minutes for questions from the audience as well, and there were so many topics that we delved on, and it was so funny because we had a one topic and then that just went down a rabbit hole. It just exploded, and so I think 45 minutes is obviously going to be a short amount of time to cover what we're going to cover. Obviously, I'll put up our details for anyone who wants to reach out to us at the end. But I'm pretty excited by this because when we spoke, it delved across a lot of areas. We've both got some war stories from our clients. You on the insurance side, mine from the IT side of things, to discuss. And I suppose just before we continue, if you want to do the honors, Luke, because I understand there's obviously heavy regulation around your side. There's obviously disclaimers. For the love of God, please don't anyone take our advice without coming to us directly. Luke, I know there's a thing you've got to say, and I'm going to hand that
Yep.
torch to you.
Yeah, look, certainly, for financial services industry, we all have these ongoing obligations. So, I'll try and be as brief as possible, but it's just something we must do. I suppose today, if you talk about anything, specific, we've got to bring it back to the general level. So, the communication that we're going to have today, I suppose, including any web links or attachments, is for information purposes only. It's not a recommendation or opinion. Your personal or individual objectives, financial situation, or needs have not been taken into account. This communication is not intended to constitute as personal advice, and I strongly recommend that you consider the suitability of this information in respect to your own personal objectives, financial situation, and needs before acting on it. I suppose this document is not I suppose if you see any of them, it's not a product disclosure statement or a policy wording for that fact. Nor is it a summary of a particular product's features or terms of any insurance product. If you're interested in discussing this information or acquiring an insurance product, then certainly, contact your insurance advisor, or to obtain, and carefully consider any relevant, I suppose, policy wording from that. And certainly, look, if you have any other questions, I'm always open to answering those for you, projecting my, willingness to help anyone.
Thanks, Luke. And we're going to give the details how to contact us, myself or Luke. Yeah, please, for the love of God, reach out to Luke. Any insurance questions, don't act on anything we say here. But the agenda I've got that we're going to cover today, and we're going to, I think we're going to sort of dance to some of the topics again with the general theme of this webinar on we've got cyber insurance. What's the demarc point? So what does it cover? And particularly, and I'm super interested when you share some of your content, Luke, some of the forms and some of the material you've got, and particularly from my area in the technical realm, I saw a cyber insurance form from CFC, major insurance provider recently, and it detailed some of the technical things that had to be in place before the company would get insurance. Making sure we've got cyber awareness training, making sure we've got phishing, and we get asked all the time, Matt, can you fill us out these forms? And I say, look, I can't fill it out for you. We're going to sit down together and you've got to sign that. So it's your responsibility, right? And that happens all the time. And I mean, from my own experience, what I've noticed is insurance providers that there's additional things that prop up. And I know the requirements and the premiums will differ amongst insurance providers, but I have personally noticed that certainly in the last 24 months, there's been more checks and balances that are required before they will provide coverage. A great example on the CFC form was making sure that you have some form of regular cybersecurity education and or anti-phishing campaigns to your staff to demonstrate that you are on the front foot and providing some education to your organization's staff before they provide insurance. Is that a fair statement for you, Luke? Have you noticed some of those trends as well with additional requirements amongst providers?
Yeah, look, Matt, for example, I have access to 38 markets for cyber insurance. And every cyber insurer, is slightly different. You've got to understand and respect that. But also the information, what they ask for, can be different to how their policy responds, to that. Because every policy has certain terms, conditions, and exclusions. And they're not all one and the same. But the other bit that you touched on, the quality of information that you provide is paramount. And normally the first thing or the first question clients always ask about the cyber insurance, it's not normally about the coverage, but it's also about what it'll cost. But, I suppose your disclosure of the information and getting that right and having really good quality information leads to, much better, I suppose, outcomes, whether that is from a premium wise, excess wise, or terms and conditions as well. And that part from your proposal form has to translate to you understanding enough about, I suppose, what you mitigate in your business to stop a cyber security event or attack. And that's how you transfer that risk over to the insurer, and that's why they collect a lot of information. So I don't blame clients for asking for assistance. They should, have I suppose, go on a learning basis. If they don't know enough about their system, they should learn more, or that should be a catalyst, to come to someone like you, Matt, and ask further questions and working on that form and understand why. And certainly I think that will help them in the future. Or the other part that I always say to clients is use that form to go, are these some of the things in my business that I think I need to understand about and make a change to, or find other solutions to protecting myself? That's the other side that I see clients proactively, consider that from a proposal form. And that's why I say, if you understand the circumstances, which we're in the business of providing, I suppose, active and quality advice, we can tailor solutions better to you instead of providing you with a product that comes off the shelf. And every business is different in its nature, origin, business activities, and what it does. And so sometimes that has to be tailored that way. It's not one size fits all.
It's such a funny area, and because I've got the agenda obviously in the screen, and I know you've got a lot of content, and feel free if you want to present some of your content. You've got some documents that you want to share as well and present as well, Luke. I'm super keen on running this through you. A huge question that we get is, can I rely? So my IT company has the professional indemnity and public indemnity. In the event of a breach, can I rely on the IT incumbent on their insurance policy if I've suffered some form of cybersecurity attack? And this is, I know this answer is not a black and white yes and no, but if a client said to you, look, I've got an IT company, they've got a 20 by 10 million policy, whatever it is, and they're protecting me, and that's in a contract that here's what they're going to be doing. We're going to protect your systems and all these things in place. Could a client realistically rely on the IT company's insurance policy in the event that something happened to them or their data?
Look, generally where I see that come into play is a client normally seeks legal advice on that. And I'm certainly not qualified to provide legal advice, but that's normally where I see the trigger on it for, I suppose, their IT company. Because sometimes if they suffer a loss and they're uninsured, they'll look for other ways to go, how can we mitigate our loss? So in that, I suppose where they may be looking at, and similar in the case of insurance, is they're looking for, I suppose, negligence, on that part, and that's where by law, they might give a deduction or a consensus around that as to whether that can occur or not. But that's why it's very important, I suppose, for all parties involved in providing advice, product, or service to have insurance as well. It provides I suppose, a real pivotal role in protecting, what you do each and every day.
I remember this story. It's quite amusing. It's not amusing in the sense of what occurred. It's quite amusing the events that happened. So there's a client that came across to us some time ago. They had been breached. They'd been hacked. They'd lost a lot of money. Right, lost a lot of money from a phishing attack. And the loss to the reputation arguably was more expensive. And then they tried to make that case, and they said, "Look, we're going to litigate you, and we think you've done something malicious, or sorry, you have provided a lack of protection to our organization, and then we want to litigate you because of those damages. By the way, we need you as the IT company, not us, but the previous IT incumbent, to investigate what that malicious attack was, then to provide that as evidence to the courts on what damages there were. And of course, what IT company is going to own up to themselves doing something wrong. And it's such a funny area because, the IT companies ourselves, we are the custodians of so much data, and finding out and following that bouncing ball as to where and how an attack occurred, it can get pretty complex. And I know plenty of IT companies, and not going to name names or throw anyone under the bus, but it often requires a high level skill set to, first of all, really trace that and to find out, well, how did the attack actually occur in the first place? And when you know that, you can obviously say and implement the steps to mitigate that attack or defend in the future. But if they don't know what they're looking for, if they don't know what they don't know, that's when they need to engage a specialist, right, to provide that forensic sort of reporting. And obviously, the more specialized you go in any industry, the more expensive it gets, right? So, I mean, do you find a lot of companies that do get breached and they've lost data, reputation? Um, when that happens, do they just go, well, you know what, I'll loan off next time and then do something different, or is there any steps that you find that they take? I suppose it depends on the size of the organization, right, in terms of how big they are and what the steps that they take.
Yeah, look, I think there's certainly some ways to look at that. I can say you're definitely right in having I suppose, a forensic IT specialist is normally involved. If you're insured, the insurer will pay for those services in a sense as part of some of the coverage. Or if you're uninsured, depending on the size of your business, some clients will want to find what they took. It depends on how important it is. That's what it comes back to them. And I suppose also depends on the type of clients that they deal with. And I can say I've seen, it is expensive. I haven't seen invoices for under 100,000 for, I suppose, some larger clients, determining what has been taken. I suppose as an outcome of what you find's been taken, whether it's proprietary limited or proprietary information or intellectual property, or whether there's been a breach of privacy, they've got, some private or sensitive information on other people. you know that's where the response has to happen, because The IT, I suppose, people just find what is taken and investigate, identify that. But then they say, here's all the other outcomes. So that might translate to going back to a lawyer, to provide you with legal advice about, it might be a breach of privacy in that sense. So there is some other prongs that come out of it, but I certainly think the specialist forms part of that, in that. So someone like, if you do that within your business, Matt, that's very important to a client if they really have that desire to find out what they're understanding. On the other side as well, certain insurers offer some of those services only in time of crisis, to assist you through that as well. Because they need to understand, I suppose, the nature of a claim more, and that's why they provide some services, because certainly they can be quite complex in finding out, what's been taken, or what the quantifying the loss, or you might see that in a physical dollar value as well. So
Definitely,
mm,
definitely. Well, I mean, the majority, as we know, the majority of businesses in Australia are small businesses, and this is going to sound like a funny question. And I mean, from my side, we think that obviously everyone should have IT support and coverage. But do you, again, it's going to sound like a really funny question, but is there any instance where you would say to a company, look, you're not big enough, or you don't have enough of a footprint to maybe warrant cybersecurity yet? You don't have a huge reliance on IT. Maybe you're a tradie, you're in the tools most of the time, and you don't really have a whole lot of IT. Or do you say, look, if you're a business in Australia in 2025, you should have some form of coverage, even if it's a smaller policy? Or do you think that every business in Australia has got a responsibility to ensure themselves in the cybersecurity arena?
Look, I certainly agree. Look, I don't silo any business, whether you're small or big. I suppose the advice that I relay is everyone has that risk. But the biggest misconception out there is a lot of businesses, certainly it's, whether you're a micro business, whether you're a medium-sized, business, they still have those risks, and they're born, and it is hard because businesses certainly like to stick their head in the sand and say it will never happen to me. And I especially see that in a trade related world where they think my trade, nothing, no one wants to take anything for me. But it just depends on what you deal with, in that instance. Like you might take client payments through your trade business as well. And somehow if you store those details and someone gets a hold of them, what does that mean for you? And you might not have, I suppose, processes, systems, or certainly the means to implement those, from a smaller business, and certainly from the income that you earn to do that. And that's why I suppose, determining what your risk is very important. And then how you either transfer that risk or mitigate it through other means, is the real point.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Is there and I suppose in some of the common maybe pitfalls on in terms of the topic of the conversation, what cyber insurance doesn't cover, is there any main things that you come across that people are surprised that they're not covered by? Like, let me give you an example in the IT space, and we're not talking about insurance. Again, there's a prospect that came out to us a couple of months ago, and actually the story that we were at a networking group together, Luke, and the story that there was a principal of a law firm, and she was, a lovely lady, and someone had sent her an email. It was a plain text email approximately 6 months ago, and it was really just, hey, how you doing? And creating that relationship and just saying hi and sort of introducing themselves. And they said, oh, look, I do finance, and they didn't really mention too much what they did. They were just trying to rope her in. So over the course of 6 months, they managed to build a relationship and the trust, most importantly, of this a very, very clever lady, and convinced her to go to this crypto platform to trade, to buy and sell cryptocurrency. And she did. She deposited a lot of money to this platform, and he was generating these fake reports on, hey, look, Doge is going to increase in Bitcoin, and oh my goodness, your Bitcoins are increasing by 17%, and really professional, well crafted, really sophisticated looking reports. And she fell for it, and she deposited about 120,000 onto the platform. And as soon as she went to withdraw the funds, lo and behold, couldn't do it, errors, and she tried to reach out to the person. and he was obviously gone. We actually followed that bouncing ball because it went to an Australian bank account. So it was so sophisticated. It went to an Australian bank account in South Australia. We submitted the report to the Australian Cybersecurity Directorate. Got a call from a South Australian police officer, and he said, "So what's actually happened is that Australian account in Australia, it's a Commonwealth Bank account, was actually owned by an elderly gentleman. He reported a few months prior that his identity was stolen. So the attacker was able to create a bank in Australia and then transfer those funds offshore, where the trail sort of with the jurisdiction got lost. It was that sophisticated, a whole creation of a botnet and all these things like that. And her question to me was, well, Matt, should the IT systems be able to stop that? And I said, look, the initial email was plain text. There was nothing wrong with it. He was creating a relationship. But certainly the link he sent you, the cryptocurrency, and then the tools that we implement, which detects patterns and using AI to determine if there's anything sort of in the sentiment of the emails traversing these two parties, is there something wrong? That's normally red flagged. The question though from the insurance side to you, Luke, is would something like that be covered? Like she has been duped and she's herself has gone on the platform and she thinks she's getting a great deal, and it's does some of it come down to the insurance providers say, actually there's got to be some common sense here, and you failed to show common sense? Or with that case, would she be able to collect everything back of what she lost in that platform?
Yeah, look, it's certainly an interesting case, and you need to certainly understand, I suppose, the circumstances in full to determine that. But look, I suppose one of the biggest and numerous breaches that I suppose the cyber criminals get away with is they really influence or look for that human error point. And in that's where I suppose it's a lack of understanding, I suppose on the human side of, what is the risk of doing something, or they've been duped into doing something or clicking on something, that certainly exposes them to a scenario, I suppose like, that lawyer had. Look, what I do know is, depending on it, that could be a personal case. And in the last many years, I suppose primarily business cyber insurance was the lead that come out first. But also on the other side, there is personal cyber insurance that is, I suppose, emerging into the market. And I wouldn't be surprised if, in thinking of dreaming ahead in the future, that some sort of cyber might be attached to your home and contents policy. In that, that's the way that it's going, and we'll see if that comes to fruition in the future. But certainly, between personal and business, there are slightly different, in some of the policies I've seen, slightly different terms and conditions in that apply. And so, look, depending on what the insurable clause is, in that document may determine what is covered and what is not covered. Other than that, the exclusions that are normally present. And coming back to your point before, where you fill out a proposal form, the other bit that comes into it is, I suppose, if you're saying what may not be covered, is, for example, if you have a business that's had a cyber attack, you'll generally see on your cyber proposal forms that it says, please disclose previously if you've had a cyber-related attack. And I think there's good reason for that, because there might still be a remnants when they're going to insure. There might be a remnants of what is inside that computer sophisticatedly from, a hacker, or they might be sitting to do something again. And I know that that's where, where businesses can fall down, and it may also on the personal side as well, is if they have had an attack and they don't disclose it correctly, and that comes up in the future, across some of the more prevalent policies that we recommend. That's one of the triggers that I suppose that denies a claim, because you willingly knew that you had a previous cyber event and you didn't disclose it. Because there can be, and I've seen some cybersecurity teams, certainly talk about what is remaining after someone has an attack if they don't do anything, and what can still be there. But that's why insurers ask that question for a real definite purpose, as well. But look, in her circumstances, I suppose she willingly do that, and that's, there's a lot of people that you see the biggest one come up on the media or the news about dating sites and, providing money to people through your bank account that, you think you're in love with over line. But, and that's where you certainly got to have a look at that, or see within the terms and conditions. But where it may come back to, I suppose, as a generalized sense, is I suppose social engineering fraud, is quite a large part, and that's where someone, you know, sophisticatedly collects information from you, of all different types to try and, I suppose, get a benefit out of that financially. And that's something that, if you look at that, or her circumstances, that's where something, that insurable clause may have applied depending on the determination of that. And certainly what she does or what measure she's had in that as well.
Wow. So are you
Mm.
saying that it's kind of fascinating? So are you saying that um and I get it's so hard to be black and white and go, this is covered, this is
Yeah.
covered, but are you saying in that case, and the dating example is a great side, we hear that a lot, and we hear a lot of the phishing stuff. Are you saying that, look, if I sign up for personal insurance, and let's say that I went on a popular dating website and I'm already married, but I fell head over heels on a person that was purporting to be someone else, and I then sent them a whole bunch of money. Are you saying that in the insurance claim, even though I might be protected from my personal cyber insurance, that depending on the scenario of what transpired in that case, it's really a case by case basis, and there is no blanket insurance policy that says, whatever dating website you go to, you're covered. It depends on, well, what actually transpired.
Yeah, look, it depends on the insurable clause because, in the determination of that, if it is considered to be, I suppose, social engineering fraud, that is one of the sections of coverage that is offered under many of them. And whilst there are certain sublimits, on that, and that's what you have to be very mindful of, you've got to be able to go, well, how do you quantify your loss for that or what you're going to do? Obviously, there's other parties that I always see in the chain or hear about when something happens as well. And normally the banks have a part in that. And I think they, have been getting better at identifying when someone comes in and goes, I need to transfer some money to my partner overseas. I do hear about that from some other circumstances in that as well. So there's other line of defences in it. But look, we see it where someone purports to be someone over email, for a business, in that sense, and they fish or they dupe them or trick them into divulging information. And certainly, under a business side, if that condition is met or that trigger is met, then that claim or that section of coverage, may pay out for such a circumstances as well. But for social engineering fraud, it is for some people an opt in and opt out. And depending on certain people and certain persons, in life, people go, oh, that's too much. It might be too much for the premium to add that on. So I think for the moment, I'll leave that aside. So there is a choice and understanding, and getting advice on understanding is a real key part, to that, or understanding your circumstances of what you may do, is important.
Absolutely, and I've just put on the new form on the. I might just stop and reshare the screen because the
Yep.
form exactly in that train of thought of what you're mentioning. Let me just bring this up. In terms of what is covered, what isn't, is pretty interesting. Let me just bring this up. Sorry, Luke. Let's just grab this up on the screen. Here we go. Okay, so I guess on that vein of thought, what you're mentioning is, this is the form from CFC. You can see the form
Yep.
right on this on the provider. So major provider on the form, and exactly what you're mentioning about, hey, the previous cyber incidents in terms of, yeah, well, what type of incident that occurred, and I suppose similar to medical insurance, right? So I imagine it'd be the same case if I had a major, you know, cardiovascular issue or something like that, and I tick no, I go overseas and have a heart attack and need to get airlifted from that country of origin, and I don't disclose that, I imagine coverage probably would be denied on the basis of that I didn't report that previously, right? And I guess that'd be the same in cyber insurance, right?
Yeah, it's sort of like you're collectively saying it's a pre-existing injury. You might call that a technology related injury. But sometimes if you take no action after you have a cyber attack or it's not cleansed or dealt with correctly, I think there's, from what I see and read, in insurance world from claims, there can be something that comes back for you. And certainly if you look at some of, you know, people go, how do you know about what the best thing is for cyber insurance to know what you're not covered for? I said, well, don't read from the start. Pick up your policy wording, go to the exclusions page and have a look at it. And if you don't understand the terms of what they're in there, then seek some advice on that as well.
Mm.
But one of those is, I suppose recording if you've had a prior, same on the form there, you've had a prior or existing, and sometimes that's unknown as well. So, there are those cases where, you could have someone sitting in there, you know, in the cyberspace, a hacker reading all your emails, and you're filling this out, and it's still yet to happen in the future. So, how do you know what you don't know either? So you're going on the disclosure to the best of your knowledge that you haven't, but certainly if you have one, I would certainly utmost be declaring it anyway if you had one in the past.
Is there a? I mean, I know there's the notifiable data breach in case of an organization's breach. You've got to
Yeah.
you've got to notify, right, essentially the government that that's what's occurred. Is there
Yes.
another form of register that if a breach occurred, especially to maybe a public or a large organization, is there a register somewhere similar to a credit check that it becomes known from an insurance perspective that you either have made a claim or you have had a breach? So in the case if they try and go to another insurance provider, tick no. Is there some sort of black mark that exists somewhere?
Look, I wouldn't think so. It's just about understanding, and that's why. Remember, I talked about, I suppose, the importance of quality information. So it'll probably be understanding A, what happened,
Hmm.
B, the subsequent bit is what you did to remedy that, in that part. And then in the remedy, have you had any further breaches, or how do you know that it is? Do you do something like you've had another check to you know to make sure that it is foolproof in what you're saying, and you've cleansed your computer of, depend of whatever the nature of that cyber, actor or threat is, in that sense. So,
Yeah.
and that's why I look, information is important. It, from what I've seen, I've had clients that come to seek insurance after the fact that it happens, and so they've suffered a loss off their bottom line, and we go through that process. But sometimes it means that, I suppose in a risk profile, they're not necessarily saying no. They've been able to obtain insurance, but there is something a bit more like on the premium side, or they may have some conditions about what you do or who you work with, from your IT provider to a cybersecurity expert, that is a recommendation sometimes that I've seen, that can give you that, well, I suppose, credible proof that your system is threat free from that time. So some of those proof points, it's working with others. It's not just about the insurer to help with determination, and that's part of, I suppose, mitigating risks as well. Because I suppose I always consider, cyber insurance, I call it like a game of soccer. So it's your goalie in time that, I suppose, your defenders and attackers in the field, the ball gets through them and hits the back of the soccer net. The rest of the field, you still have to undertake, I suppose, duties, policies, procedures, and implement them in your business to protect yourself. Bless you, Matt, there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry, I just had to
yeah,
quickly mute
that's
myself
it.
while I sneeze there.
Yeah, that's it. So, that's why I suppose, for cyber insurance, everyone thinks it's an expensive thing, but the more mitigants you have and the more that you can show and write down on your form, that quality of information again leads to better outcomes, not only on a premium side, but on an excess side as well. But it does vary depending on the industry type you are in and the type of personal, or sensitive information you collect. But going away from that, I suppose what you touched on before, there are other duties, that I suppose are reportable to the government in that instance. And I have clients that, even though they might fall below the required level, some of them still will go and report as well. Where there's some people that won't report, or they stick to the threshold that their business has got to have a turnover of more than 3 million, to go and tell the privacy commissioner, as well, in that part. So, but it just
Mm.
depends on your policy and procedure and what you want to do around that as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
Is there, you see this a lot, Luke, and is it a fair statement to say that you're only seeing an increase in the number of claims in cyber insurance. I imagine it hasn't gone down in the last 5 years. It's probably a very steady trajectory of increased claims and attacks and reports coming your way across your desk.
Yeah, look, what I see is I certainly see the increase in people that choose to be uninsured for that. So they're generally the ones that I hear about the most. And the reason why they're ringing is they're saying, is there any other coverage under our policies that covers our loss from this cyber-related event? And I think that's the biggest thing I see growing, in the environment. When I see someone with a claim for, I suppose, or that holds a cyber-related insurance in some way or cyber event protection, generally some of their losses are mitigated by what they've got, you know, implemented, in their IT systems, networks, and everything else in between. And the losses are lesser because they're able to offset or mitigate from some of the things you go. And some say we've tried to stop it, and there's certain things in the IT world of things that you cannot stop. And it's always that some of my clients say, that age-old thing, they hacked the Pentagon, the most secure place in the world. There still are things that can get through your lines of defense as well.
Mm,
But certainly on the other side, where I see it the most is, I certainly provide advice about cyber insurance on every interaction I have with my client, and whether that's on a renewal or if they say to me, we want to see you every 3 months, it's something we always talk about, especially if they don't have, in that instance. Or, the other side to it is, often some people like our conference today, is they're asking about, what have you seen out in the market, or what can you tell me? And some of those things, I want to build my understanding before I go to this level. But sometimes I talk to them about, it's certainly not just about, recommending insurance. The other bit I talk about is what have you done beforehand to identify vulnerabilities in your system or your network, to stop these people as well. And I push some of that onus back, going, well, let's do a business continuity plan about risk away from insurance, to say what are you actually doing about it if you're not going to take it up as well. And look, I have a system that just helps, it's part of Insurance Advisornet's offering that just helps clients really come to a determination of that,
great.
and thinking more about that as well. So, on that side, and that's why working with, clients have to work with other partners, I call it, in their business, especially on the IT side of things or cybersecurity, and helping them do that. They can't do it alone.
Mm.
And that's how getting them on the road to a business continuity plan, if they don't want to pay it, that's a really welcome start that generally doesn't cost a lot, and they get the biggest bang for buck out of that. And then if they really start to have the realization that my risk is great or it quantifies greater, they can get an insurance solution as well. But you can have that solution whether you think that or not as well on that side.
Yeah, and that was sort of the next question I had, and I think you've touched on it then. Is there any one thing that you just want to tell people who might be uninsured, or maybe they're currently insured, in terms of, look, taking the steps that they should do, and not to put words in your mouth, but is it a fair statement you would say, look, check out what you don't have. Like, if you don't know what you don't know, well, that's the first step in terms of having a conversation with a professional in this space, whether it's you, whether it's me, whether it's someone in this space who can at least direct you on what you don't know. What's that old saying? Prevention's better than the cure. Is that I'm getting it right? No, there's some sort of medical. So what's the medical saying where it's yeah, prevention's better than the cure. I don't think I'm getting that entirely right, but you get the gist of what I'm trying to say, right? In terms of
Correct.
forewarned is forearmed, or
Yeah.
failing to prepare is playing to fail, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely right. Yeah, if you don't plan, you may plan to fail. So,
Mm,
um,
mm,
but yeah, but
mm,
look, certainly that's where, businesses need to stand up and say, look, don't say that you're too busy. Everyone has some sort of IT, email, something in their business. But that's just about going, well, what is my business continuity plan? Should something happen to that? And especially if it derives an income, people are more, you know, open to having a look at that.
mm,
And that's why I think it is really important. It's not just about, everyone can have insurance solution if they want it, and it's strongly recommended. I provide it in advice to everything that I do every day. But also the other bit that I see of great importance is getting on the road to having or setting your own business continuity plan to how you mitigate risks. And sometimes you need all your partners around you to put that together, or good advisors, from whether it's from IT, insurance, will help or guide you, to building a better business continuity plan, in that sense, if you choose not to. But yeah,
Mm, mm.
and that's why I think it's just crucial to have, seeking advice in whatever form you think of is often important, and the role of a good quality advisor, that you trust, about certain things, really adds value to your business.
Mm. And speaking, I suppose, touching on some of the more bleeding edge of technology, if you haven't heard, all the cool kids are talking about it, AI and the latest advancements. Are you seeing anything in that space? Certainly, in terms of the coverage and some of the sophistication is moving so fast in this space. The use of AI, deep fakes, and mimicking people's voices and creating videos, and it really, really, cutting edge stuff. Are you seeing any of this space in insurance providers, trying to scramble to update their policies to say, well, like, this isn't protected or that isn't protected? Is there any of movement in the insurance world in that area?
Look, I suppose in AI, I still think in Australia we're a little bit behind the rest of the world. I suppose where insurers, why I say that, where insurers look for is they look for the past, and for claims examples, to go, if we're going to suffer a loss, or insure this particular occupation or type, what is that going to look like? We draw from, I suppose, a database or a history of what we've seen that's arisen out of that. And I think with AI, I suppose the biggest risk question is what are some of the outcomes that you don't see that come out of that? And look, I only go, I suppose as part of my development, we have to, do certain, I suppose, training on insurance law or insurance law cases that come. And they're big learnings. And, I know I recently read one about, I suppose there was a law case in the United States, whereby they had used AI to present some of their, I suppose, legal findings. And then it was found that they used AI, that it wasn't verified in that sense, but they used it. And it was a landmark case, I suppose, in America that come back against that and what that can do, in that instance. And that's what just having a look at an insurance case law can teach you. And I still think there's ongoing bits out of that, but it is something new for our world. What it will look like in the future? Well, it's yet to be seen.
Mm.
I look after, you could say, I try to look after some mechatronics engineers, and they're on the forefront of, I suppose, electronics, robotics, and writing code of different things in the future. But the one thing that insurers will look at is, they might make a product or design something for a product, is they try and put a feasibility study around, what can happen out of, or if something malfunctions as well. And it's quite interesting if you read some of those documents, around that. Yeah, but that's where they go, will something, will it hurt a human or will it damage some property, which I suppose are the biggest things that people insure for, in today's modern world, liability or property. That's the core part of insurance. And that's where, that's what they're always looking at, or insurers are looking at, going, what is it going to look like in the future, of that. So, and
Mm.
I'm sure there's going to be certainly a lot of test cases in that, but it'll get ironed out. And I suppose just like everything new, there will be advances that come in insurance as well, as part of that. But also, I suppose there's going to be recognition of, I suppose, risks and dangers that come with that as well. So it's just how they rate that or perceive the risk, profile from what it is.
It's so funny because you're so right. Australia being really behind the times in terms of the cyber and the tech space, and even the role of the NBN. Like, there are places in the world, classified as third world countries, that have a faster internet connection speed with the fiber than some places in Australia in the rollout. And it's only really been in the last probably 3 to 4 years, the Albanese government has tried to invest heavily with some of our US allies and partners in the cybersecurity of Australia as a continent, and typically around the telecommunications and the spam calls and all the things that we receive, and the amount of money that is essentially lost to these overseas bad actors, normally targeting the vulnerable, as is always the case in these situations. But you're right. I feel like Australia has really lagged behind the rest of the world, behind the Western world in terms of some of these protections to protect its own people. And only now that there's been some serious consideration into it. We all hear the stats, you know better than I. Hey, Luke, in terms of the insurance claims and the amount of vast amounts of billions of dollars lost in the economy because of a lack of protections and all sorts of these stories we sort of hear seemingly every day now. Mm,
Yeah, look, I certainly can, can have some agreements on that. But I think, innovation always comes around as, I suppose, evolution and revolution. And I think things will continue to grow. They just change at different paces, in that. And, I suppose the number one thing that you look at in general insurance, it at some stage has to evolve and grow on that as well. But if you read some of the journals, look, I think AI is the biggest interest that insurers have around the world, and certainly reinsurers as well, about where it will go and what it will do, and how you look to insure the new emerging risks that are coming into the market, as well. That's at all levels.
definitely. I just want to bring up, I suppose, one quick screen. I've got my PowerPoint presentation, and I'll give you our contact details on the page and answer any questions for our audience as well. Let me just bring this up real quick. Um, and then go through it. It's funny. I've got one demo. It's so funny. I had one slide last time we did a last webinar last month was on the Microsoft Security Score, or the Essential 8 rather, and this slide is actually sort of applicable a lot, both of this security area into what we're talking about. And I'm sure you would have heard as well. There's all these standards, right, that we speak about. The ISO standard 27001 or the MITRE standard, and there's honestly so many acronyms out there in terms of how to protect your business, what framework, and this, and there are so many things. There are so many avenues potentially to explore in terms of what standard to follow that will help protect your data systems and its people, that it can honestly be a minefield of confusion in terms of what to follow. And I spoke about this in last webinar in terms of the Essential 8. On the insurance side, though, of interest, if if there's any of a standard that they like you to follow. So do insurance companies say, look, in terms of assessing how secure that we want you to be, is there any recommendations that insurers will give to their people they support, of any frameworks that they suggest to follow, like, hey, go for the ISO 9001, or anything like this in terms of any guidance?
Yeah, look, I don't think insurers ever will recommend that you do, some of those. It could come about if they ask, depending on it's on your circumstances of what you deal in, what your business is about, that could come. I see a lot of the ISOs, especially, across a broad range of occupations. Um, where I suppose an ISO is important is it's something that you probably should put, on it, and I suppose domicile it out, to an underwriter about these are your systems, process implementation, and I suppose what you do and behind that. And generally, when you have systems, you're always on the continuous improvement, for those as well. Whether that's for efficiency, or anything else in that. But generally having ISO accreditation, and as long as you display that every day, whether that's your quality control mechanism, for I suppose what you do each and every day, that generally in insurance terms, if put forward, shows the insurer, I suppose, how you're managing your risk better or how you run your business. And generally that translates to better outcomes, A, on risk, acceptance, and also how they judge risk, also on your premiums, and can do for excess levels as well. Um, but that is a sign of, I suppose, a business that has this, these controls, or has this system implementation in that. Whether it's, I see it a lot in management, I see it a lot in manufacturing as well. And generally, look, some of the big clients that come to do business with a smaller client, they're normally where they ask for that, or they put it as part of their commercial contract negotiations. And we have to look at that from an insurance point of view as well. Um, so yeah, I suppose it depends who you do business with, but it also, I think, is a very important framework to stress about. Part of it is that's your quality assurance program of how you do things in your business too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Um, Great topic. We're going to go to the QA section now, and I'll put up our details on the screen for myself and Luke. If you want to reach out and any questions, feel free to type any questions in the chat now. It's so funny because as we could talk about this all day, Luke. There's so many
yeah,
avenues, and I find it so funny because as I'll ask one question and you'll give a great answer, and then I'm in my head, I'm like, oh, I should ask Luke that and on this, and then there's like 45 different things to these branches that could ask off one thing, and then it really can be Alice's rabbit hole essentially. But I suppose that the takeaway is from myself, and we have a similar position that seek advice, right?
correct.
Everyone's
Yes.
situation is unique,
Yeah.
and it's important to seek advice in your particular case and what that looks like.
Yeah, look, definitely agree with that. If you want, I suppose if you think it in terms of outcomes, and if you want good outcomes to have, if you get that piece right of seeking advice, generally, if something does happen, the outcomes are greater for you, and whether it's mitigating loss or whether it's dealing with another competitor, for all different things. But yeah, but that's what I see as part of that, and in insurance especially, if you insure correctly, should you ever suffer a loss or an event, then that outcome is met, and that reduces, I suppose, your worry about what keeps you up at night or what loss you're going to have or anything else like that. But you've got to be able to willing to flesh that out and certainly communicate that, and seek the advice as well. That's the driving part to it.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. The questions. Look, you've just done too good. You just answered all the questions. Everyone's just like everyone's a little pretty quiet in the chat at the moment. Look, really appreciate your time, and again, thanks so
Thanks, Matt.
much for all this. Really appreciate your time. Just to our audience members, again, our details are on the screen. You see in front of you now. Certainly, any questions, queries, comments, please don't be a stranger. Feel free to contact Luke or myself across the email, phone call, or LinkedIn or our socials as well. Again, certainly want to thank you for your time and joining us today. Again, thank you, Luke, and I hope yourself and everyone here has an awesome, awesome weekend.
Thanks, Matt. Enjoy your weekend as well.
Thanks. Take care.